The story of the walls of Jericho is one of the most iconic events in the Bible and can be found in Joshua 6. It marks a pivotal moment in Israel's conquest of the Promised Land and demonstrates the power of faith, obedience, and divine intervention. Below is a detailed retelling of the story and its deeper significance. Background: the Israelites enter the Promised Land. After 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the Israelites, under the leadership of Joshua, had finally crossed the Jordan River into the land of Canaan, the land God had promised to their ancestors. Jericho was a fortified city standing in their way. It was well known for its impregnable walls, and it was the first major obstacle for the Israelites as they sought to take possession of the land. Jericho was strategically important, both militarily and symbolically. For Israel to claim Canaan, they first had to conquer Jericho. However, this was no ordinary city. Its walls were massive, and it had a formidable defense. The Israelites had no siege equipment or experience in attacking walled cities, but their leader, Joshua, relied on God's guidance for the battle strategy. God's unusual instructions. Joshua 6:1-5. God gave Joshua a battle plan that was highly unconventional. The Israelites were to march around the city of Jericho once a day for 6 days. This procession would be led by 7 priests blowing trumpets made from ram's horns, shofars, followed by the Ark of the Covenant and the Israelite army. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times. After the 7th time, the priests would blow their trumpets loudly, and all the people would give a great shout. At this moment, God promised that the walls of Jericho would collapse, and the Israelites could then enter the city and take it. The obedience of Joshua and Israel. Joshua 6:16. Joshua immediately passed God's instructions on to the people. For 6 days, the Israelites faithfully carried out God's command. They marched around the city in silence, except for the sound of the priests blowing their trumpets. The people of Jericho, watching from within their fortified walls, must have been confused and perhaps even fearful of this strange behavior. On the 7th day, the Israelites arose early and began their march. This time, they circled the city 7 times. On the 7th lap, as the priests blew the trumpets with a long blast, Joshua gave the command to shout, saying, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." The fall of the walls. Joshua 6:17-20. As the people shouted and the trumpets blared, the massive walls of Jericho collapsed. The Bible doesn't specify the exact mechanism by which the walls fell, but it was clearly a miracle brought about by God's power. The Israelites rushed into the city and captured it, just as God had promised. God had instructed the Israelites to destroy everything in the city as an offering to Him. This act of Hiram, devoting something completely to God, involved destroying all the inhabitants and livestock and burning the city, sparing only Rahab the prostitute and her family. Rahab had hidden the Israelite spies when they had previously scouted Jericho. Joshua 2. And she had demonstrated faith in Israel's God. As a sign, she hung a scarlet cord from her window, which marked her house as a place of safety. Rahab and her family were saved and integrated into the Israelite community. Rahab's faith is remembered in the genealogy of Jesus, Matthew 1:5, and she is praised as a model of faith in Hebrews 11:31. Joshua's curse on Jericho. After the city was destroyed, Joshua pronounced a curse on anyone who would rebuild Jericho. He declared that whoever attempted to rebuild it would do so at the cost of his firstborn son and his youngest son. Joshua 6:26. This curse was fulfilled many years later, when a man named Hiel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho during the reign of King Ahab, losing his 2 sons in the process. 1 Kings 16:34. Themes and lessons from the fall of Jericho. Faith and obedience. The Israelites' victory was a direct result of their obedience to God's unusual command. Despite the odd strategy, they trusted in God's power and followed through, showing the importance of faith and obedience in achieving success. Divine power. The fall of Jericho is a testament to God's power. The city's walls, which symbolized human strength and defense, crumbled at God's command. This event demonstrates that no human barrier is too great for God to overcome. Judgment and mercy. While Jericho was destroyed as part of God's judgment on the Canaanites, Rahab's story highlights God's mercy. Despite her background as a prostitute and a Canaanite, her faith in God led to her salvation. This foreshadows the inclusion of Gentiles in God's plan of salvation. God's sovereignty over the Promised Land. The fall of Jericho was not just a military victory, it was a spiritual declaration that the land of Canaan belonged to God, and He had given it to His people. Jericho was the first of many victories in Israel's conquest of the Promised Land, all under God's guidance. The beginning of the conquest of Canaan. Jericho's fall was only the beginning. After this victory, the Israelites went on to conquer other cities in Canaan, establishing themselves in the land that God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jericho's defeat paved the way for future conquests, but the battle was more than just a military campaign. It was a demonstration of God's ability to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles for His people. The story of the walls of Jericho is more than a dramatic military victory. It is a powerful narrative about faith, obedience, and the supernatural intervention of God in human history. For Joshua and the Israelites, it was a clear sign that God was with them, guiding them and giving them the victory over their enemies. The collapse of Jericho's walls serves as a timeless reminder that, with God, no obstacle is too great, and His promises will always come to pass. Joshua's journey is a remarkable narrative of leadership, faith, and the fulfillment of divine promises. He succeeded Moses and became the leader of the Israelites, guiding them through pivotal moments in their history, including the conquest of Canaan. Below is a detailed overview of Joshua's journey. Joshua first appears in the book of Exodus, where he serves as Moses' military commander. One of his earliest victories was against the Amalekites. Exodus 17:8-16. He was a faithful servant to Moses, and when Moses ascended Mount Sinai to receive the law, Joshua accompanied him part of the way. Exodus 24:13. Joshua's loyalty and faithfulness were evident when he, along with Caleb, was one of the 12 spies sent to scout the land of Canaan. Unlike the other spies who were fearful of the Canaanites, Joshua and Caleb gave a positive report, trusting that God would deliver the land into Israel's hands. Numbers 13:14. This bold faith led to Joshua and Caleb being the only adults from that generation allowed to enter the Promised Land after the Israelites' 40 years in the wilderness. After Moses' death, Joshua was appointed by God to lead Israel into the Promised Land. In Joshua 1, God repeatedly commands Joshua to be strong and courageous, promising His presence and guidance as Joshua leads the Israelites in fulfilling their covenant with God. The first major test of Joshua's leadership came when the Israelites had to cross the Jordan River. Much like the parting of the Red Sea during Moses' time, Joshua witnessed a miracle as the waters of the Jordan stopped flowing, allowing the Israelites to cross on dry ground. This miraculous event solidified Joshua's leadership in the eyes of the people. As a memorial of the crossing, 12 stones were taken from the riverbed and set up at Gilgal to remind future generations of God's miraculous provision. The fall of Jericho is one of the most famous events in Joshua's journey. Following God's unusual battle plan, Joshua led the Israelites in a silent march round the city for 6 days. On the 7th day, after the Israelites circled the city 7 times and gave a great shout, the walls of Jericho collapsed, and they captured the city. This victory was a testament to Joshua's obedience and God's power working through him. After the victory at Jericho, the Israelites attempted to take the smaller city of Ai but were initially defeated due to the sin of Achan, who disobeyed God's command to destroy everything in Jericho. After addressing the sin, Joshua reorganized the troops and successfully conquered Ai, demonstrating that victory was tied to obedience to God. Joshua 9. Not all conquests involved warfare. The people of Gibeon, fearing Israel's advance, deceived Joshua by pretending to come from a distant land and making a peace treaty with him. Though Joshua was deceived, he honored the treaty, which showed his integrity. However, this event also highlights the importance of seeking God's counsel, as Joshua failed to consult God before making the agreement. Joshua 10:12. Joshua led a series of campaigns to conquer the southern and northern regions of Canaan. One of the most famous battles occurred during the southern campaign, where God caused the sun to stand still at Joshua's request so that the Israelites could complete their victory over the Amorites. Joshua 10:12-14. Through a combination of military strategy and divine intervention, Joshua led the Israelites to victory over many kings and cities in Canaan, securing large portions of the Promised Land. Joshua 13:22. After the conquests, Joshua oversaw the division of the land among the 12 tribes of Israel. Each tribe was given its inheritance, fulfilling the promise God made to Abraham. Joshua also established cities of refuge and ensured that the Levites, who had no land inheritance, were given towns to dwell in. Joshua's final charge and death. Joshua 23:24. As Joshua approached the end of his life, he gathered the Israelites at Shechem and delivered a powerful farewell speech, urging them to remain faithful to the Lord. He recounted all that God had done for them, from the exodus from Egypt to the conquest of Canaan. In his final words, Joshua famously challenged the people to choose whom they would serve, declaring, "But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." Joshua 24:15. After leading Israel for many years, and ensuring the people had taken possession of their inheritance, Joshua died at the age of 110 and was buried in Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim. Joshua's life is a powerful example of leadership, faith, and obedience. He played a critical role in the fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham, leading Israel into the land they had long awaited. His story illustrates several key themes: faith in God's promises, from his time as a spy to his leadership of Israel. Joshua demonstrated unwavering faith in God's promises, trusting that God would deliver Canaan into Israel's hands. Obedience. Joshua's success was closely tied to his obedience to God's commands. The fall of Jericho, the crossing of the Jordan, and the conquest of Canaan were all the result of Joshua's faithful adherence to God's instructions. Leadership. Joshua was a strong and courageous leader, who followed in the footsteps of Moses but also established his own legacy. He guided Israel through military campaigns, legal decisions, and spiritual leadership. God's faithfulness. Throughout Joshua's journey, God's faithfulness is evident. Despite challenges, God kept his promises to give the land of Canaan to Israel. Joshua's leadership and the conquest of Canaan mark a major turning point in Israel's history. Through his guidance, the Israelites moved from wandering in the wilderness to settling in the land God had promised their ancestors. His story remains a lasting testament to the importance of faith, obedience, and courage in the face of overwhelming challenges. After the fall of Jericho, Joshua led the Israelites through a series of significant battles as they conquered the land of Canaan. Here's a detailed look at some of the key battles after Jericho. Joshua 7:8. The Israelites' next target after Jericho was the city of Ai, a smaller and less fortified city. However, their first attack on Ai ended in defeat because of Achan's sin. Achan had violated God's command by taking some of the spoils from Jericho for himself, which led to Israel's initial defeat at Ai. Once Achan's sin was dealt with, Joshua devised a clever military strategy for the second attack. This time, Joshua set an ambush behind the city. The main Israelite force feigned retreat, drawing the men of Ai out of the city, while the ambush force entered and set the city on fire. As the men of Ai were trapped between the two Israelite forces, the city was captured, and Ai was destroyed. Joshua 9. After Ai, the inhabitants of Gibeon, a nearby city, feared Israel's conquests. Instead of fighting, the Gibeonites resorted to deception. They pretended to be from a distant land, and asked for a peace treaty with Israel. Without consulting God, Joshua made a covenant with them, only to discover later that they were neighbors. Despite the deception, Joshua honored the treaty, but the Gibeonites were made servants in Israel. Coming, woodcutters and water carriers for the Israelites. The Battle of Gibeon and the Southern Campaign, Joshua 10. Soon after, 5 Amorite kings, from Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, formed a coalition to attack Gibeon because of their treaty with Israel. The Gibeonites called for Joshua's help, and he responded by marching his army overnight from Gilgal to Gibeon, surprising the Amorite coalition. In one of the most remarkable miracles in the Bible, during the battle, God made the sun stand still at Joshua's request, allowing the Israelites extra time to achieve a decisive victory. This event is recorded in Joshua 10:13, so the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. Additionally, God sent hailstones that killed more Amorites than the Israelites did with their swords. Following the victory at Gibeon, Joshua led Israel in a series of battles that resulted in the defeat of other cities in southern Canaan, including Makdah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, and Debir. This series of victories effectively subdued the southern region of Canaan. Joshua 11. After securing the southern region, Joshua turned his attention to the north, where a larger coalition of Canaanite kings, led by Jabin, the king of Hazor, gathered to oppose Israel. This army was described as being as numerous as the sand on the seashore, and equipped with horses and chariots, which presented a significant threat. God assured Joshua of victory, and the Israelites launched a surprise attack on the northern coalition at the waters of Merom. The Israelite forces routed the enemy, and Joshua burned the city of Hazor, the head of the coalition. This victory brought the northern region of Canaan under Israelite control, conquering other key cities. Throughout Joshua 12, the Bible lists a total of 31 kings defeated by Joshua and the Israelites during their conquest of Canaan. These battles included smaller cities and their respective kings, who had united against Israel but fell to Joshua's forces. The division of the land. After the major campaigns, Joshua oversaw the division of the land among the 12 tribes of Israel. However, some pockets of resistance remained, and not all of Canaan was fully conquered at this time. Joshua's leadership ensured that Israel controlled the majority of the land, but future generations would be responsible for dealing with remaining Canaanite strongholds. Faith in God's power. Time and again, Joshua's victories were not simply the result of superior military strategy, but acts of divine intervention. From the fall of Jericho to the sun standing still at Gibeon, these battles illustrated God's sovereignty over Israel's conquests. Covenant fulfillment. The conquest of Canaan fulfilled the long-standing promise God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob regarding the land of Canaan. Joshua's victory signified the tangible fulfillment of that covenant. Obedience to God's commands. Joshua's leadership was marked by consistent obedience to God's commands, whether in military strategy or in the treatment of conquered cities. His example underscores the importance of seeking and following divine guidance. The battles after Jericho demonstrated Joshua's exceptional leadership and unwavering faith. Through these campaigns, Israel took possession of the land that God had promised them, though the full conquest of Canaan would take many years and further challenges. The story of Joshua's military victories and the subsequent settlement of the tribes laid the foundation for Israel's future in the Promised Land. Who fought Joshua next? After the conquest of Jericho and the battles at Ai, Joshua faced several more foes as he led the Israelites in their campaign to conquer Canaan. The next major conflict was with a coalition of southern Canaanite kings, who were alarmed by Israel's success. The 5 Amorite kings. Joshua 10. After Israel's alliance with the Gibeonites, 5 Amorite kings formed a coalition to attack Gibeon. These kings were Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem; Haham, king of Hebron; Param, king of Jarmuth; Japhia, king of Lachish; Debir, king of Eglon. They laid siege to Gibeon because of its treaty with Israel. The Gibeonites called Joshua for help, and he responded swiftly. In a dramatic and miraculous battle, God intervened by sending hailstones that killed more enemies than Israel's soldiers. Joshua also prayed for the sun to stand still, giving Israel more daylight to secure the victory. The northern Canaanite kings, Joshua 11. After the southern victories, the northern kings banded together under Jabin, king of Hazor, forming a powerful coalition. These kings gathered at the waters of Merom, with a vast army described as numerous as the sand on the seashore, and equipped with horses and chariots. Joshua led a surprise attack against them, and God once again assured Joshua victory. The battle resulted in the destruction of Hazor, and the northern coalition was defeated. Smaller city-states, Joshua 12. After the major battles in the north and south, Joshua continued to fight against smaller Canaanite city-states, ultimately defeating 31 kings listed in Joshua 12. These battles ensured Israel's dominance over Canaan, though some Canaanite pockets of resistance would persist. Final conquest. The next significant battles after Jericho were against the Amorite coalition in the south, and the northern kings under Jabin. These victories, through God's intervention and Joshua's leadership, established Israel's control over the majority of Canaan, fulfilling God's promise of the land. After the fall of Jericho and Ai, Joshua faced various other foes in his mission to conquer the Promised Land. Besides the famous battles against the Amorite coalition and the northern kings, Joshua fought several other key enemies during his campaigns. Here's a summary of who else Joshua fought. The 5 Amorite kings, Joshua 10. This coalition of southern Canaanite kings came together to fight against Joshua after Israel made a treaty with the Gibeonites. The kings who fought Joshua included Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem; Haham, king of Hebron; Param, king of Jarmuth; Japhia, king of Lachish; Debir, king of Eglon. These kings were decisively defeated when Joshua led a surprise attack, and God sent hailstones to aid Israel. After this, the Israelite army conquered many other southern cities. The northern kings, Joshua 11. The northern campaign began when Jabin, king of Hazor, organized a coalition of northern kings. These kings included rulers from Madon, Shimron, Aksif, other kingdoms in northern Canaan, round Mount Hermon and the Jordan Valley. They gathered with a massive army, but God assured Joshua victory. Joshua's army launched a surprise attack at the waters of Merom, leading to the total defeat of the northern coalition and the destruction of Hazor, the head of the alliance. 31 kings defeated, Joshua 12. In total, 31 kings were defeated by Joshua during the entire conquest of Canaan. These kings ruled smaller city-states that Joshua fought as he led Israel to take control of the land. Some of the notable cities and their kings include Jericho, Al, Jerusalem, Hebron, Lachish, Gezer, Debir, Geder, Hormah, Rad, Adullam. Each of these kings represented a city-state or small kingdom, all of which fell to Israel under Joshua's command. The complete list of these kings is found in Joshua 12, which documents the cities and territories conquered. The Anakim, Joshua 11:21-22. Joshua also fought and drove out the Anakim, a race of giants who lived in various regions of Canaan, including Hebron, Debir, Anab, and the hill country of Judah and Israel. These giants were considered formidable warriors, but Joshua's forces were successful in driving them out, except for a few who remained in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. Remaining Canaanite tribes. While Joshua led Israel to victory over most of Canaan, several Canaanite tribes and strongholds remained unconquered by the end of his campaigns, including the Philistines and cities like Tyre and Sidon. These areas would become future challenges for Israel after Joshua's death. Joshua fought numerous enemies during his conquest of Canaan, including coalitions of kings from both the southern and northern regions of the land. His leadership brought about significant victories, largely attributed to God's intervention and strategic military actions. By the end of Joshua's campaigns, much of Canaan was under Israelite control, though some areas remained to be subdued in the years to come. Joshua's death is described in the Bible in Joshua 24:29-31. He died at the age of 110 years after leading the Israelites for many years, guiding them through the conquest of Canaan and helping them settle in the Promised Land. Here's a breakdown of how his life concluded. Final address to Israel, Joshua 23:24. Before his death, Joshua gave a farewell address to the Israelites. He gathered the people at Shechem and reminded them of all that God had done for them. From their time in Egypt to their conquest of Canaan, he urged them to remain faithful to God, warning them against turning to the gods of the surrounding nations. It was during this speech that he famously said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua 24:15. Covenant renewal. Joshua also led the Israelites in a renewal of their covenant with God at Shechem. The people affirmed their loyalty to the Lord, promising to follow his commands and worship only him. This act symbolized their ongoing commitment to the covenant that had begun with Abraham. Joshua's death and burial. After these final instructions and the renewal of the covenant, Joshua passed away. He died at the age of 110 years. He was buried in the land of his inheritance at Timnath-Serah, which was in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gosh. Joshua 24:30. Joshua's leadership was instrumental in bringing Israel into the Promised Land and securing the majority of it for the 12 tribes. After his death, Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of the elders who had outlived Joshua, as long as they had personally witnessed the great works the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua 24:31. However, after that generation passed, the Israelites gradually fell into cycles of disobedience and idolatry, leading to the period of the Judges. Joshua's death marked the end of an era, and with his passing, Israel's leadership entered a new phase, without a centralized figure like Moses or Joshua to lead them. His legacy, however, as a faithful leader and servant of God, remained foundational to Israel's history. After Joshua's death, the leadership of Israel did not pass to a single successor like Moses to Joshua. Instead, Israel entered a period of tribal leadership, known as the era of the Judges. The period of the Judges. Following Joshua's death, Israel had no centralized leader. Instead, individual judges arose as needed to lead and deliver Israel from its enemies. This period is detailed in the book of Judges and spanned several centuries. The judges were not kings, but were divinely appointed leaders who were responsible for settling disputes, enforcing the law, and sometimes leading military campaigns. Some notable judges included Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, Samson. This era is often described as a time of moral and spiritual decline for Israel. The recurring pattern throughout this period was that the Israelites would fall into sin and idolatry, face oppression from neighboring nations, cry out to God, and then be delivered by a judge whom God would raise up. Elders and tribal leaders. After Joshua's death, elders who had experienced his leadership continued to lead Israel for some time. Joshua 24:31 mentions that Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him, and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. These elders helped to maintain stability for a while, but after their generation passed, Israel began to struggle with loyalty to God, leading to the chaotic period of the Judges. Significance of the Judges. No central leadership. During this time, there was no centralized leadership. Each of the 12 tribes operated semi-independently, with no king or national leader. Cycles of sin. The period of the Judges is often characterized by a repeated cycle: sin, oppression, repentance, deliverance. Transition to monarchy. This era eventually led to the establishment of the monarchy in Israel. The last judge, Samuel, was the one who anointed the first kings of Israel, Saul and later David. In summary, after Joshua's death, Israel was governed by judges and tribal elders, a system that continued until the rise of the monarchy with Saul, and then David, Israel's most famous king. After the period of the Judges, Israel experienced a significant transition from a loose confederation of tribes, under decentralized leadership to a centralized monarchy. Here's what happened next: the rise of Samuel and the call for a king. 1 Samuel. The final judge of Israel was Samuel, who played a critical role during the transition from the era of judges to the era of kings. Samuel was both a prophet and a judge. During his time, the Israelites demanded a king to lead them, largely due to the failures of Samuel's sons and the increasing threat from external enemies like the Philistines. Samuel's sons. Samuel appointed his sons, Joel and Abijah, as judges over Israel, but they were corrupt, taking bribes and perverting justice. 1 Samuel 8:1-3. This led the people to ask for a king, saying, "Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." 1 Samuel 8:5. The demand for a king. Samuel warned the Israelites that having a king would bring about certain consequences, such as heavy taxation, forced labor, and military conscription. 1 Samuel 8:11-18. However, the people insisted, and Samuel ultimately sought God's guidance. The anointing of Saul. 1 Samuel 9:10. God instructed Samuel to anoint Saul, from the tribe of Benjamin, as Israel's first king. Saul was chosen by God, and he began his reign with humility. He had some early military successes, notably against the Ammonites. 1 Samuel 11, which helped solidify his position as king. The reign of Saul. 1 Samuel 13:15. Saul's reign began well, but over time, he disobeyed God's commands. He made several critical mistakes, including offering a sacrifice himself instead of waiting for Samuel. 1 Samuel 13:8-14, and sparing King Agag of the Amalekites along with the best of their livestock, when God had commanded total destruction. 1 Samuel 15:1-35. These acts of disobedience led to God rejecting Saul as king. The anointing of David. 1 Samuel 16. While Saul was still on the throne, God directed Samuel to secretly anoint David, the youngest son of Jesse, from the tribe of Judah, as the next king. David was a shepherd boy when he was anointed, and although he did not immediately take the throne, his anointing marked the beginning of a long and complicated relationship with Saul. David's rise. David became famous for slaying Goliath, a giant Philistine warrior. 1 Samuel 17. He served in Saul's court, gained popularity, and even married Saul's daughter, Michal. However, Saul became increasingly jealous of David's success and tried to kill him multiple times. 5. Saul's downfall and death. 1 Samuel 31. As Saul's reign deteriorated, he became obsessed with hunting down David, who fled and lived as a fugitive for several years. Saul eventually faced a final battle against the Philistines at Mount Gilboa. In this battle, Saul and his 3 sons, including his heir Jonathan, were killed. Saul took his own life after being wounded. 1 Samuel 31:1-6. The reign of King David. 2 Samuel. After Saul's death, David was made king, first over Judah and Hebron, 2 Samuel 2:4, and later over all of Israel, 2 Samuel 5:1-5. David united the tribes, established Jerusalem as the capital, and secured Israel's borders through numerous military victories. After the period of the Judges, Israel transitioned to a monarchy, beginning with King Saul and later King David. This period marked the end of decentralized tribal rule, and the beginning of a more structured kingdom, setting the stage for future kings like Solomon and the eventual division of Israel into the northern kingdom, Israel, and southern kingdom, Judah. May your spiritual journey be filled with God's grace and peace. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to inspire others on their walk with the Lord.